Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and how are you doing? So, what we'll be looking at today is SQL injection, and we'll start with defining what SQL injection itself is. So, SQL injection is a web security vulnerability that allows attackers to interfere with the queries an application makes to a database. What do we mean by an application? An application is more of what you have that interact with almost every day. So it's a kind of program that allows you to complete a specific task. Something like WhatsApp, which allows you to perform social interaction and social messaging as well. Then we have other applications as well, like Jumia, for example, a popular application that's been used to place orders and buy, sell things online. Now, for this kind of applications, these other applications makes use of what they call databases to store user data, credentials, and all kind of data as well. And the SQL programming language is what is being used to query and manipulate these kind of databases. So you can use SQL programming language to create these databases, and you can also make use of it to query this type of database. You can check out one of our videos that we produce later on, which will be based on SQL programming language itself. Now, for SQL injection, SQL injection allows attackers to view unauthorized data, modify and delete database data, execute administrative operations, and in some cases, issue commands to the operating system. What this is just talking about is that whenever a database is vulnerable or whenever an application is vulnerable to SQL injection, then attackers can manipulate the database as much as they want. We have different type of SQL databases. We have the likes of PostgreSQL, we have Microsoft SQL, Oracle SQL, and also what's the name of this one? We also have MySQL as well. And then talking of SQL injection, how does it work? Whenever an application fails to properly validate or sanitize and user input, what do we mean by user input? User input, I mean, is look at this application, for example. I want to talk about user input. User input is when user put things into or send things to the database, send clean queries to the database. If you look at this kind of application, which part of this application allows us to communicate with the database? Now, you see, search for products. Where are these products being stored? The products are being stored in the database. So this part allows us to interact with the database directly. So we can search for things like, let's say, a product like iPhone. So when we search for this kind of products, a query is being sent to its database to retrieve any product named iPhone. And then it retrieves these products for us, saying iPhone 15 Pro. So this is the work of SQL queries. So when we all we will do is to search for iPhone, but in the backend, in the background, what happens is that an SQL query like this is being sent to the database to prompt it to give us the things we need. So an SQL query such as this. So when we search for iPhone, then it brings this out where the category equal to iPhone, or let me say where the product name is iPhone. Just putting it in the midst of something we need. We get now sending a query and just putting our credentials there. Now we have different types of SQL injection. We have the type of SQL injection that is based on technique, and we have the ones that are based on the impact. What we'll be focusing on is the ones that are based on technique, and the one we'll be much more focused on for today is the union-based SQL injection. In subsequent videos, we'll be looking at the likes of blind SQL injection. But for today, we'll be looking at union-based SQL injection, and we'll be looking at how you satisfy its conditions. So in the next episode, you see how we find union-based SQL injection and how we exploit it. But for this particular video, we'll be looking at how you satisfy the conditions for SQL injection union-based attacks. Now, for the union-based attack, you make use of union operator. What union attack does is that union attack allows you to combine your own query together with the application's query. Look at this case where whenever you search for iPhone, then it brings up iPhone. Then what union will do is that the particular query that is being sent to the database, whenever you make use of the union attack, it combines your own query as well to it. What I mean is this: let's assume that the query that's been sent to the database, anytime you search up for something, is this saying select the name, price, rating from the table called products, where the name is equal to whatever you search for. So if you search up for iPhone, then you search for iPhone. Now, what the union attack will do is that imagine that a user put in something like this. Union, instead of searching for iPhone, you just search for something like this, saying union. And anytime you are making of a union query, it's being followed by a select statement. So union select username, password from the table called users. So saying you also want to select the username, password, and email from the table called users. When this kind of input is being sent to the database, here's what you will have. So instead of searching for iPhone, you searched for this. So this becomes select name, price, rating from products, where the name is iPhone, union of select username, password, and email from the table called users. So right now, what this is doing is that you are selecting the name, you are selecting this will be displayed, and this as well will be displayed. Here is the application's query by itself, for itself. Here's the application's original query, and here is your own added query. But what combines both of them together is the union. That's why they call it a union attack. So whenever an application is vulnerable to a union attack, then you can execute something like this, and it will work. Now, moving on, that's what we'll be focusing on, but we have other kind of attacks like the error-based attacks that allow you to extract information from error messages. Then you have the blind SQL injection, which is split into two. There's a Boolean based, which is the true or false condition, and there's the time based, which is if it delays, if it's been delayed, it can either indicate for you true or false as well. Now, how do you test for SQL injection? You have three phases here. The first phase is the reconnaissance and information gathering phase. In this phase, you note down where your injection point is. Now, these are the places where we can have our injection points in an application. It can be in the URL, it can be in the forms, it can be in the HTTP headers, it can be in the request or the file upload features. In the URL, for example, look at this URL. Let's take this URL for example, where we have filters. We are not allowed to put in inputs here, but we have filters. So users can click on filters to see what product is being linked to it. But whenever I click on electronics, then this displays electronics to me. Why is this? What happens is that anytime I click on electronics, a query like this is being sent to the database saying select, let's say the name, price, or let's say something like select all from the table called products, where the category, this time is not a product name, but rather the product category is equal to whatever you click on. So if you click on electronics, where the category equal to electronics. So a query like this is being sent to the database. Select all from products, where the category equal to electronics, then it displays this. Now, if you look at this kind of query, you can see that electronics is the input, which is what we have here. Category in the URL as well, you can see category equals to electronics. If you come to this URL to manipulate this field, to manipulate that URL, since you can't input directly to the application, but you can manipulate the URL. If I put in fashion here, then it says what? It brings out the fashion, which changes to this filter. But if I search up for something like iPhone, iPhone is not a category, but rather a product name. So therefore, this says that it does not exists. No product found in this category because there's no category called iPhone. But for this to happen, without it being any of this, that means we can put in inputs from here. That is where the URL parameter is. Now, that's for one. Then another one is the form fields like login, search, and all. And that is the search function we have here that we checked earlier, or your login page. Your login page allows you to interact with the user's table most of the time, where the user credentials are being stored. So it checks for, let's look at the login page, for example, where you put in your username and password. A query like this will be sent to the database saying select all from the table called users, where the username equal to whatever you input and password is equal to whatever you input. So if this is correct, if this returns data, then you can log in, but if it does not return any data, then you can't log in. So the username and password must be correct. It must exist in the database for it to be selected. This is how login pages work as well. So they communicate directly with the database as well. Then you have the HTTP headers, post put, and also file upload features. File upload features saying when you're trying to upload files, to maybe Jumia, for example, you're uploading to their database. So it's allowing you to communicate with their database as well. Now it says, now how do we, and now that we've noted our injection point to be this, let's say we want to be using this as our injection point. So that's what we want to use for this episode. Then we see, it says, how do you map the application behavior? On a normal request, you have this, which is the normal or electronics, category report to electronics. This. Now, if you add a single quote, you have to check out for errors. Then whatever your result is, you should log all responses, the status code, the error, and the timing. Now, how do we see the status code? How do we see the errors and the timing? That's why I like to make use of what they call box suits for this kind of test. So I'll be using bulk suits, and then I'll be using the browser in bulk suits called Chromium. So when you go to under the target tab in bulk suits, you will see open browser. So just click on it and it will open up a bulk browser for you. Copy your target URL and paste into your bulk browser. Now we have this in our bulk browser. If you come back to bulk suit now, you will see it. So I'll be coming to that part of category equal to electronics and sending it to what we call the repeater. So I'll come to my repeater tab. Now we have electronics. I'm going to highlight this section because that's where my input is. So I'm highlighting that section. And that's where I'll be putting data into. Now, if you look at the instruction here, it says that whenever you add a single quote and you check for what? Errors. So let's see if we are going to get any error when we add a single quote. So apply these changes and say send. Now let's check out for error. I'm going to be searching from here. If you look at the status, it says look at the status code, look at the errors, and look at timing. Now let's look at the status code first. If you look at the status code here, we have a status code of 200 over here. Then if we are to look at uh, the errors as well, you can search up for errors. And you can see that some errors appeared here saying that we have fatal error, uncaught SQLi exception. If you don't want this, you can also just use the render page. If you don't like using this kind of code head interface, you can use the render page. And this will also allow you to see how it is in the likes of Chrome itself. So let's see what this brings out. So if you scroll down here, you can see error. So this tells us that it returned an error when we added a single quote. Now we've mapped it's the application behavior itself. Now, how do we detect it? It says we can detect it using either a single quote, a double quote, a backtick, an escape character, or we can use these ones as well. But now, I want to show you ways as well. This is our input, right? Why did this return an error when we added a single quote? Reason why this returned an error while we added a single quote is because we are dealing with this part of electronics. Then we decide to add another single quote here. So our input is electronics and a single quote. And when that's being imputed into the hope base, this is what is there by default. So whatever your input is will be injected into this point. So what we have injected into this point is electronics and a single quote. When the application wants to execute this, it says select all from products where category equal to electronics exists and a single quote. Yeah, that's fine. So we have a opening quote here and we have another closing quote here. But at this end part, this is going to make it return an error because this is just another opening quote that has no closing quote. So this is going to make it return an error, and that's why we are getting fatal error. If you decide to comment out this part, what do I mean by you commenting out something? Anytime you comment out a particular part of a line of code, and it's not going to execute, it's just going to be taken as a description. So it's not part of the code itself. So it's not going to execute at all. How do you comment out things in SQL? In different kind of SQL databases, they all have different ways that they comment things out. But the one that is common all through all of them is double hyphen and a single space at the end. Then anything that comes after that will be taken as a comment. So we'll come to this part and we'll be adding that double hyphen and a single space. So if I apply this change and send, if this should return true, if this should not show me any error, then it is vulnerable to SQL. But if it should show me errors, then I won't really say it's vulnerable to SQL. So let's see. When I sent this now and check, you can see this is no longer showing me any error message, which tells me that this is vulnerable to SQL injection. This is what I sent. So if you copy this, check in my notepad as well. So my input becomes like this. This is what comes after the double hyphen. So this will be executed. This is what will be executed as the code, which is select all from product where category equals to electronics, and that is why it returns true. Now, if we want to continue on this, let's continue on this. Now, what we're looking at is the SQL injection union attack. For an SQL injection union attack, an SQL injection union attack has two requirements, which is that both the initial query and the other query you're adding, it must be returning the same number of columns, which means since this is retrieving name, price, and rating, 3 columns. The other column that should be added should also be returning 3 columns, which is like username, password, and email. You cannot decide to if this one is retrieving 3, you cannot decide to retrieve 2 on this. But now, I don't know how many columns this is retrieving. How do I find that out? I can do that by making use of 2 ways, which is either using what they call order by, or I can use union select null. When using union select null, your number of null must be equal to the number of columns being returned. So if this is returning 3 columns, then your number of null as well should be equal to 3, which means you should be having 3 nulls like this and null. So that's what that means. But that will be taking a lot of time. Now I'll start with using order by. When using order by, you will always get a true unless the number of columns is more than the number of order by you are using. So I'm going to come here and say order by 1. The number of columns will always, don't forget your comment. The number of columns will always be more than 1. Don't let me say more than, because for order by, it is usually up to the number. So if it is up to 1, it says true. If it is not up to 1, it says false. So is the number of columns up to 1? If I apply this change and say send, now let's look at our response. This is expected to give us true because we know perfectly well that our number of columns is more than one. The number of columns will definitely be always either returning one column or more than one column. So is it up to one? It says yes. So it can either be one or more than one. So the number of columns is either one or more than one. So this will represent our true. Anytime we get an output like this, that means yes. But anytime we get an output like this, if I say order by 1,000, I know I cannot, or let me say 1 million. I cannot get a column up to 1 million. So I definitely am expecting false. So if I send this now, then this says no, fatal error. So this will represent my false, while the first one represents my true. Now, is the number of columns equal to 10? Is it up to 10? It says, if you send this, don't forget you apply changes and send. Then this says no, it is not up to 10. Okay, is it up to 9? Apply changes and send. It says it is not up to 9. Okay, is it up to 8? Then if you check now, this says yes, that this is up to 8. The number of columns is up to 8. To confirm that, it says the number of columns is up to 8. Now, what number is up to 8 but not up to 9? The number is 8 itself, which means we have 8 columns. To confirm that, you can only get a true when the number of null is equal to the number of columns. So it's until when I have 8 nulls that I'm expected to see a true. If I try using 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, let's confirm if that is true. So I'm saying union select. So union select null 8 times. Apply these changes and say send. If you check this now, this says true, even though I'm using null 8 times. But if I decide to use 7 null, which is less than 8, and the number of columns is 8, then I'm expected to see a false, since the number of columns is not 7. So I need to use 8 nulls. So this tells us that the number of columns is equal to 8. Now, next thing we want to check for, which is the next condition, is that each column, which I mean the first column here should be returning the same data type as the column here. So if this is text, then the first column here can also retrieve only text. Same thing with the second, same thing with the third. So if this is integer, for example, then this should only be returning integer as well. So how do we know the data type that each column is retrieving? How do we know the data type each column is retrieving that we can retrieve on each column? Now, what I'll do here is that I'm going to, the most interesting data that most people are interested in, or let me say most attackers are interested in, is text, or let me say string. The reason for that is because when you're looking at data types like your username, password, they are always in string. So I'll be checking for string data in there. Now, what I'll do is to change each of the null to string. So anytime it's in quotes, it takes it as a string. That's why I'm putting this in quotes. So let's see. Let's start with the first null. Can the first null take a string data in quotes capital A? And this says that yes, it can take string because you can see this is true. How about the second one? Can it take string as well? So I'll use this as B. I can retrieve A on all of them, but I just want to make it B and the likes. It says yes, it can take it as well. How about the third column? Can it take C? So I've tested this application previously, and I know that this application, for all its columns can take text. All of its columns can take string. So let me just go straight to the point to make everything string. So E, you have E, you have please don't get one. You can also use 1. You can use 12. You can use 1, 2, 3. As long as it's in quotes, then it is a string. So main thing is you just trying to retrieve string in there. So send, and you can see this is true. To confirm that, you can click on these three straight lines and say request in browser. So I'll copy this, come to my Bob browser and try to make that same request in my browser. So you can see this is what I was trying to retrieve, and you can see that I have this. But you notice that the likes of A is not being retrieved, even though I have it in here. And the likes of 233 is not being displayed. Both A and 233 is not being displayed, but they are retrieved. Their columns exist, and their columns can take string, but they are not being displayed in the response. Or it's either they are being displayed, but maybe they are the images, and we don't have any image in here, so therefore those ones can't be displayed. So that's what happened right there. And this tells us that all of the 8 columns can take string data, and then you can also see that it has a total of number of 8 columns. So in the next video, which will be by weekend, this Saturday, by exactly 2 p.m., it should be uploaded. It has already been scheduled. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you.